It didn't work, milady. What didn't work, Frank? The infantryman glanced upwards. Joachim followed his gaze to the bare cliffs above. The spider that came along yesterday, Frank said. I tried taunting it so it wouldn't get away, but nothing happened. It used an ability, most likely, Lady Zaradnik replied. One that allows it to withdraw to a safe place with its prey uninterrupted. How'd it learn something like that? It's probably just instinct, the Baroness told him. Everything has abilities, but people aren't usually raised to consider them as such. Humans tend to think that one needs to learn things as they do with skills and martial arts. Under that logic, they decide that unintelligent creatures don't do anything more than what they think they can. Even when the giant tarantula used an ability right in front of you, it probably got bundled into some vague idea of things that giant tarantulas do. If we know, we know, yeah? Joachim silently agreed with Frank's thoughts. Most people, be they civilians or soldiers, categorized what they saw into easy-to-reference bundles, as Lady Zaradnik put it. Understanding the nuances of everything that one perceived wasn't necessary to get by in life. It restricts your thinking, Lady Zaradnik said. Reality becomes obscured with common belief and poorly founded assumptions. As a soldier, you can't afford to think that way because that shouldn't have happened can come just before you or one of your comrades are wounded or killed. That sounds complicated. It can be complicated depending on the subject, the Baroness admitted, but understanding what can happen and knowing how you can influence what happens is far better than waiting for things to happen to you. Being entirely unaware of something that has absolutely no precedent is not one's fault, of course, but many problems can be prevented or solved by possessing the correct knowledge and using it to think one or two steps ahead. As nice as it sounded, Joachim wasn't certain how regular soldiers could be expected to think that way. Especially when their heads and hands were full of the 6th Legion's rush training and the unfamiliar surroundings of the wilderness. The day's march led them along a route just under the mountain peaks as they headed north along the same range they had ascended. Their objective, the demi-human-occupied pass that blocked the advance of the 4th Division, was not far off. At the same time, General Ray was keeping the tribes further east reeling with the rapid advance of his battalion. How the general could be so aggressive with so few men was beyond Joachim, yet his strategy appeared to be effective. Lady Zaradnik noted that the pass that they were securing for the 4th Division was not explicitly being taken to help them, but to bring more men in to help consolidate General Ray's gains and to keep their enemies from focusing entirely on his offensive. The demi-human's unexpected move had stolen the initiative, but while the other commanders cautiously digested developments, General Ray acted as quickly as possible to steal the initiative back. Everyone was caught up in his energy, or more accurately dragged along, including the demi-human tribes. Hold. Captain Ceres stopped them just before the pass above the 4th Division's encampment. Strangely enough, while the vegetation became more sparse the further north one went, the saddle between the peaks before them was heavily wooded. There's a little lake down there that we can't see through the trees. The demis that held off Captain Cheswin are camped all around it. Let's clean up what we can on the outskirts before we move in. Once the company finished gathering, they crept down through the conifers as quietly as they could. Joachim's squad stepped over the corpses of several goblins felled by Silence enchanted arrows before coming close enough to see their enemies moving along the rocky shores of the Alpine Lake. Joachim and the rest of the squad did their best to hide behind the trees and shrubs as they waited for everyone else to get into position. Ah, shit. He and several others looked towards the sound of Destin's muttered curse. Troll come in this way. The rustle of something coming through the brush drew closer. About 30 meters away, the troll in question drew to its full height, sniffing at the air. It's about as strong as that big owlbear from the other day. Joachim, Redwin, can you cast silence on the area around us? Joachim nodded in Lady Zaradnik's direction. All right, we'll let it get closer, Biff. Shouts filtered through the trees to the north, growing in intensity with each passing second. Captain Ceres' voice rang in his head. That's all the prep we get. Finish up your fights and push for the lake. For the Empire. For the Empire. Voices around the woods rose in response to the captain's battle cry. The members of Lady Zaradnik's bodyguard emerged from their hiding places, fanning out to surround the troll. The 3-meter-tall demi-human looked about in confusion at the sudden turn of events. Frank is 1, Igval, 2. Get on either side of it, you'll be flipping it between you. Cavaliers, surround the target and attack on my call. Redwin, suppress its regeneration with a fire spell every 30 seconds. Destin, Gaston, eyes out for incoming. A cool sensation washed over him as Lady Zaradnik calmly issued her instructions. It was a different feeling from the impassioned orders of Imperial Army officers, one that worked in counterpoint to the tempo of battle, instilling them with clarity of thought and steely purpose. Frank came forward first, shield held out before him. The troll required little prompting. Rancid odors of rotting meat joined its putrid stench as it roared and lashed out with a fist as large as a man's chest. Fortress. The thud that came with the massive impact was all in Joachim's head as he winced and examined Frank for damage. A second fist came crashing in. Thrust. Thrust. 7 spears plunged in from different angles. A globe of flames struck the troll in the face. It cried out in fury, turning to its nearest attacker. 2. Challenging shout. The troll twisted towards Igval, the attack meant for merge sent towards him instead. Fortress. Thrust. Spears lanced in again. The troll seemed to only grow more enraged from their combined assault. Thrust. 1. Just as the troll flailed out with an arm, its attack was redirected towards Frank. Thrust. The next round of attacks sent the troll crashing to the ground. The men stabbed it repeatedly with their spears until Redwin cast one last spell, lighting the fallen demi-human aflame. Moving on. Watch out for goblins. Destin, find us the next troll. They formed up and advanced through the trees towards the nearby lake. Dozens of meters to either side, the squads of the 10th Company were locked in their respective battles, their foiled preparations leaving Captain Seri's men spread thin. After the Baroness bodyguard felled another 2 trolls, the goblins that had been ineffectually pestering them with crude stone arrows scattered to find more likely targets. Lady Zaradnik stopped to scan the trees. Something's not right, she said. The squads are still fighting independently. Has anyone heard from the captain? Heads shook silently in reply as her gaze touched each of them. There's a bunch of somethings west of us, Gaston said. More Demis headed over. Moving. They went westward in the direction that the ranger indicated. Along the way, they hit a group of ogres and goblins squared off against another squad. The demi-humans were overwhelmed in a single charge and Lady Zaradnik turned to address the other squad sergeant. Can your men still fight? The sergeant glanced back at his clerics. 60. Half. We're a bit roughed up, the sergeant said, but we can still fight. Is Captain Ceres alive? I didn't feel him go down, milady. The Baroness nodded. Catch up with us once you've seen to your men's wounds. Lady Zaradnik turned away after the sergeant nodded in understanding, leading her bodyguard further east through the trees. They picked up 3 more squads before finding half of the 10th Company positioned defensively on an outcropping of stone. Surrounding them were well over 100 demi-humans, howling up at the beleaguered Imperial Knights in bestial challenge. There's got to be a dozen trolls in there, one of the sergeants with them said. 3 times as many ogres. We can't take all those demis on by ourselves. Don't attack. I'll deal with this. The men gaped as Lady Zaradnik walked up to the wall of demi-humans. Excuse me. Joachim's steps faltered as the trolls, ogres and goblins nearby turned at her voice. They looked incredulously at her for a moment before the nearest troll reached out for her. Lady Zaradnik grasped its wrist. The troll suddenly stopped, frowning in confusion. Then it screamed in pain as the Baroness stepped forward and bent its arm back at a weird angle. The troll's heavy steps shuffled over the carpet of pine needles, accompanied by whining noises as it was forced back towards the outcropping. Every eye from both sides fastened onto the strange sight. The Baroness released the troll, who scrambled back to its fellows. She faced the half-circle of demi-humans. I'd like to speak to your boss, Lady Zaradnik said. The Imperial Knights watching from behind all wore expressions that must have matched Joachim's own. What was she saying? Was she trying to negotiate? It wasn't as if. Footfalls thudded into the air as a massive form appeared from out of the demi-human throng. Covered in a thick, pebbled grey hide was a hulking figure that bore only a passing resemblance to the trolls they had fought. Though hunched over, Joachim believed that the giant demi-human would be over 5 meters tall at its full height. It was a species mentioned in the Imperial Army's training but next to unheard of in the lowlands of the Empire, one with a form as large as a hill giant, a mountain troll. They were much stronger than their lowland cousins who dwelled in the swamps and forests. Joachim tensed as the demi-human walked right up to Lady Zaradnik, a stone-headed cudgel as long as she was tall dragged along in one of its dangling hands. As Lady Zaradnik only stood about as tall as its waist, she had to look up to address it. "Good afternoon," she smiled. "I'm Baroness Ludmilla Zaradnik. How might I address you?" "Ook." The mountain troll's deep, probably male, voice resonated in the air, echoing off of the peaks on either side of the pass. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Ook." Lady Zaradnik's smile remained unchanged. "I'll get straight to the point, submit." Ook's stony face crinkled into something much uglier than it already was. He leaned forward, tilting his head as he examined the Baroness. After several moments, he let out a guffaw. Joachim's squad glanced nervously about as the demi-humans joined in the mountain troll's mirth. "Hey Gaston," he whispered, "how strong is that mountain troll?" "Stronger than the ogre lord from the other day," the ranger replied in a low voice. "Too high for me to be accurate about, but around difficulty rating 75? Audible swallows sounded from around him. In a normal situation, Ook would be the target of an orichalcum rank commission, possibly adamantite. Within 2 days of their advance onto the plateau, they had run into something that could single-handedly destroy half of a legion. "Will not," Ook declared. "Soft human, soft name. Good to eat. Your war gear, mine." "I don't think it would look very flattering on you," Lady Zaradnik replied. "Since that is your position, however, I suppose that a challenge is in order." The laughter stopped. Ook looked up at the Imperial Knights on the outcropping, then back down at the young noblewoman. "You?" "Yes." Lady Zaradnik drew her glaive from the magical container under the tasset on her right hip. "Simple is best, don't you agree?" Ook looked around one last time before stepping back and bringing up his cudgel. The weapon slapped twice against his palm before he suddenly raised it in an overhead swing. Savage cheers rose from the spectating demi-humans as the mountain troll struck the ground, sending a cloud of dried soil and pine needles into the air. He charged through it after Lady Zaradnik, who had drifted back several paces. The Baroness led Ook backwards in a circular path, glaive jabbing out to draw a dozen shallow cuts over the mountain troll's forearms. He didn't seem to care at all, continuing to swing wildly in her wake as his regeneration recovered his injuries. "Stand still, little human. Get smashed." In response, the Baroness slashed open the mountain troll's left knee, causing him to stumble onto his hands. Cheers rose from the Imperial Knights and Joachim frowned over the fact that no one seemed to care that they were treating the deadly duel over the mountain pass like a match in the grand arena. Ook rose to his feet with a snarl, sweeping his weapon out towards the Baroness before charging again and overshooting her former position. His target continued to lead him around on light steps. "Oh, I get it," Himsel said. "Get what?" Winston glanced at his fellow cavalier. "Why she's going round like that. It's like fighting someone who keeps leading your horse in a circle. If it's too tight, you can't get momentum or power into your attacks. Lady Zaradnik's making that troll do 10 times more work and he's going face first into all of her cuts and stabs." "Sure, but he's regenerating the damage." A howl filled the air after a wild swing left Ook exposed to a stab in the eye. Recoiling from the strike only earned him a slash that opened his throat. The Baroness stepped around the mountain troll's renewed advance and aimed a thrust at his ribs, but the strike was battered away. She withdrew into her evasive pattern again, but Ook stopped following. "Ready to give up yet?" Lady Zaradnik asked. The mountain troll answered with a vicious snarl and lunged, jabbing forward with its cudgel. Lady Zaradnik drew back with the attack, raising the tip of her glaive over the crude weapon before bringing it down to hammer its stone head to the ground. She stepped forward with a lunge of her own, driving the silvery blade of her polearm up under the mountain troll's jaw. Chunks of brain and bone exploded from the back of Ook's skull. A great shout rose from the Imperial Knights as the savage giant king crashed backwards to the ground. Their jubilation was cut short, however, as he rolled over and pushed himself back up to his feet. Joachim watched aghast as what surely should have been a fatal wound closed in seconds, the mountain troll's regeneration replacing even the missing fragments scattered over the ground. Lady Zaradnik clearly outclassed her opponent in skill, but the Uk's natural advantages seem to mock all of her training and discipline. She knows how to stop that regeneration, Redwyne said. Even told me to deal with those trolls from back before. Why is she not doing anything about it? Maybe she doesn't have anything on her to deal with it, Winston said. That's impossible, Paul scoffed. She's probably got a whole damn wagon in her bags. Joachim shook his head, unable to comprehend why Lady Zaradnik was fighting the way that she was. The troll's reach made it difficult for her to go on the offense, but, at the same time, he readily exposed himself to her attacks. Between her powerful-looking equipment, seemingly flawless defense and advanced martial arts, there shouldn't have been any contest. All Luke had was raw physical might, crude animal hides, a primitive club and a troll's resilience. Lady Zaradnik personified the vaunted discipline and skill that the Imperial Army's recruiters and trainers always talked about, the edge that the Imperial Knights supposedly held over the savage tribes and monsters that they protected the Empire against. Yet before them was a woman who far outstripped the best of their battalion's captains, unable to gain ground against advantages that a demi-human was simply born with. Did racial traits truly count for so much? If so, how could the humans of the 6th Legion prevail over such powerful foes in the wilderness without champions of their own? It seemed that they were always one monstrously strong foe away from being one-sidedly obliterated. A parry rang into the air as the Baroness blocked an overhead blow of Uk's massive club. She pivoted while maintaining her bind, shifting the troll's weapon outwards. Her left hand slid her glaive forward under the troll's armpit and her right pushed the blade upwards, detaching Uk's right arm at the shoulder. The limb and weapon thudded to the ground. What the? She switched her grip. Johann shook his head. I didn't even notice. Neither did the mountain troll, who also seemed to not care, taking a huge swipe at Lady Zaradnik with his left hand. The attack was predictably blocked by the haft of her glaive, then a kick sent her airborne. Groans from the Imperial Knights and cheers from the demi-humans erupted into the air as the Baroness skipped twice over the forest floor before smashing into the tip of an exposed boulder. She spun like a spindle for a good 3 seconds before hitting the ground. Despite suffering what would have been a crippling injury to anyone else, the Baroness immediately pulled herself up to her feet. While she did, Ook took advantage of the opportunity to recover his arm. Joachim fought down his disgust at the sight of the troll's severed limb reattaching to the mangled stump at his shoulder. So you do have more than brute strength. Lady Zaradnik's words came with an almost warm smile and a bright gleam in her dark eyes. Maybe she was some sort of battle maniac on top of everything else. The Baroness smoothly gathered her steps in a purposeful advance, the blade of her glaive leading the way. Ook worked his reattached arm before grasping his cudgel with both hands to meet her. She stepped offline with her right foot, pivoting as she redirected the mountain troll's overhead smash with her glaive. The cudgel skidded down the polearm and thudded to the ground beside her left foot. Lady Zaradnik released the leading hand on her weapon. A silvery flash glimmered across the clearing as she drew the polearm up to split her opponent's grotesque face in half. She didn't stop there, whipping her glaive around to take both of Ook's arms off at the elbow. Ook stared dumbly at the stumps of his arms for all of 1 second before a blossoming iris blasted him off of his feet. His abdomen erupted from the impact, entrails splattering everywhere as he hit the ground. Even after sustaining such a grievous injury, however, the mountain troll fought to right himself with the remains of a waist that could no longer support him. Finish him. A call from one of the Imperial Knights near the outcropping sounded out. Kill that bastard off. Don't let him get up again. More calls rose to end the fight. The crowd fell silent as Lady Zaradnik stepped forward to stand over Ook. His monstrous regeneration was nowhere near close to recovering him to a proper fighting state. She wordlessly looked down at the mountain troll and his struggles ceased. His ragged breathing filled the air for several seconds before she turned to sweep her gaze over the gathered demi-humans. The Baroness' cool voice sounded out over the clearing. On your knees. As one, the demi-human tribe knelt. What the hell is this? Joachim's cheek couldn't stop twitching as diminutive goblin forms scurried back and forth through the camp, delivering firewood, food and, for some reason, dirt. Their settlement had been reorganized into something that resembled an army camp, their crude lean-tos and litters radiating from the tents of Lady Zaradnik's bodyguard. Ward. He turned a half-dead stare to his left, where Paul, Merge and Digval were standing watch over their camp supplies. What do the temples say about Demis? Merge asked. Nothing in particular. Then what about the law? Are demis illegal? They're not illegal, Joachim replied. No particular race is prohibited from conducting their business in the Empire. Technically, they weren't in the Empire, but military regulations still applied. Not that there were any regulations that specifically addressed what was going on. The irregular nature of the 6th Legion had taken yet another irregular turn, and all they could do was try and figure out what rules were to be observed. A female goblin came up to Joachim, proffering a handful of dirt, gravel, twigs, pine needles and other debris. He stared at it for a long moment. No thanks. The goblin gave him a strange look before sniffing and going on her way. Why do they keep doing that? Joachim muttered. Because you smell funny, Lady Zaradnik's voice came from behind. I don't understand what you mean by that, my lady. They're trying to teach you a survival skill, the Baroness told him. Goblins mask their scent like rangers can, actively applying the odors of their environment to themselves. Unfortunately, this can include too much goblin if they live there for too long, but that's an issue that is easily solved. What she was offering you was a bath so you can blend in with them against predators. A bath, Joachim said flatly. A bath, Lady Zaradnik nodded. A dirt bath. So I can smell like dirt. Civilian nobles often did silly things like wearing perfume and using scented soaps and herbal baths, but goblin methods probably wouldn't catch on in the Empire. The Baroness smiled at his reply, looking around at the goblins that now made up the majority of her forces. It wasn't just dirt, she said, but that's the general idea. Goblins are highly social and a goblin community spreads simple skills rapidly, or maybe they simply assume that everyone has the same skills? Anyhow, every member tends to end up with similar skill sets after a while, so long as they're capable of learning. The way that goblins readily spread and absorb simple knowledge is probably one of the reasons why goblin armies form so smoothly. Did they offer you dirt as well, my lady? No. Why is that? Joachim belatedly realized that he had probably made a fatal implication. Fortunately, the young noblewoman appeared to be too busy paying attention to the goings-on of the demi-humans around them to pay it any mind. Perhaps they like how I smell? Following her absent reply, Lady Zaradnik produced a large sack from the magical container at her hip. She stopped one of the goblins scuttling by and put the bag in its arms. Food, she said. Make sure you share it with the others. After sniffing the bag, the goblin nodded and wandered off. Joachim's gaze followed it until it vanished into the evening shadows. Do you always carry food around with you, my lady? He asked. It seems that way, the Baroness answered. I grab nuts, grains, dried berries and other long-lasting edibles wherever I go out of habit. That was the 5 kilograms or so that I foraged in the past week. He had been with her for that entire week and never noticed her picking anything up. Was there really that much food lying around all over the place? Lady Zaradnik walked over to the fire where stew was simmering in her cauldron. The sound of her idle humming filled the air as it usually did when she prepared their meals. At first, Joachim enjoyed the tune, but then he found out that it was a warlike hymn of the 6. No, it wasn't warlike - it was an actual battle hymn. Several of the goblins watching the Baroness made crude attempts at mimicking her. A ranger from the 10th Company appeared, cautiously making his way through the camp under the curious gazes of the surrounding demi-humans. Baroness Zaradnik? Yes? You asked to be informed when Captain Ceres woke up. The ranger's voice faltered as the men nearby glared daggers at him. Several of the goblins nearby picked up on their sentiment and glared daggers at him too. Lady Zaradnik smiled slightly. How is he doing? She asked. The clerics say he'll be all right, the ranger answered. He's in his tent right now. I'll join him once dinner is served here, Lady Zaradnik said. Thank you for letting me know. Dinner was dished out several minutes later. The Baroness and her bodyguard seated themselves around the fire. A few shifted and looked out at the demi-humans in the woods all around them. Dozens of pairs of goblin eyes watched them in return, glittering in the firelight. You sure this is a good idea, milady? Johann asked. They ain't gonna slit our throats in our sleep, are they? Why do you think they'll do that? Lady Zaradnik asked back. Dunno. Goblin things, I guess. They'd certainly do that if you were a certain type of enemy, the Baroness said. But we aren't their enemies anymore. Upon taking control of the demi-human tribe, Lady Zaradnik had laid down some simple ground rules. The first was that they weren't allowed to be mean to one another. This was presumably because conditions in a tribe could vary and, depending on the situation, the weakest members were treated cruelly. Lady Zaradnik's first mandate was understandably popular with the goblins. Secondly, they weren't allowed to eat one another for the time being. How this did not count as being mean was lost on Joachim. The "for the time being" was also concerning. When asked whether her subjects in the Sorceress Kingdom ate one another, she answered it depends. Dwelling upon her answer only dragged him to a dark and terrifying place in his imagination. Thirdly, they were to not act violently towards the humans. If humans came and did something mean to them, they were to let her know and she would obliterate the offenders. The last part was said with a perfectly straight face, as they were now subjects of the Sorceress Kingdom and afforded the protection of its laws and armed forces. None of the Imperial soldiers wanted to find out if she was serious about that or not. "What do you mean by a certain type of enemy, milady?" Destin asked. "There are enemies," Lady Zaradnik answered, "and then there are enemies. Most of the time, a tribe's enemies are rival populations competing for resources. This type of competition manifests as wars that consist of threat displays, raids and skirmishes which persist until one side gives up. The loser migrates, usually fighting weaker tribes for their territory. This is what is happening when the Imperial Army responds to demi-human incursions." "But the Empire isn't a rival tribe," Igval said. "I was trying to frame it in terms that are easier to digest. I suppose I'm horrible at that. Maybe it should be broken down even further. Try considering it from a living being's point of view. What do they need to survive? Food, water, a place to sleep?" "That's right," Lady Zaradnik nodded. "Broadly speaking, a tribe's territory amounts to the land that is needed to support them. Anything that threatens to take from their territory is competition. This includes beasts both mundane and magical, other tribes, monsters and assorted intruders that might take resources away. Essentially, it's poaching and, like us, they retaliate against poachers. When poaching is conducted by groups, it's called raiding." As the scion of a frontier house, this was something that Joachim already understood. The vast majority of the Imperial Army's common soldiery, however, came from the towns and cities sheltered from contact with the wilderness tribes. To them, as Lady Zaradnik once put it, demi-human was an idea, a vague concept that was cobbled together out of popular beliefs that tended to focus on the potential threat that they represented to humanity. Those that knew better, indeed the Empire itself, did nothing to dissuade them of those notions, as thinking otherwise was unnecessary or even undesirable. The way that Lady Zaradnik phrased things, however, did not carry the hard tone that his father or grandfather used, one that simply described tribal behavior as something that happened and needed to be dealt with to defend imperial interests. Instead, she defined the motives that led to their behaviors, dispelling the illusion that demi-humans were the irrational, violent savages that most imperial citizens believed them to be. At the same time, she did not cast them in a good or evil light, she merely pointed out that their actions were driven by understandable purposes. "Why do they keep picking on the Empire, then?" Paul asked. "They don't," the Baroness shrugged, "at least not in the way you're probably seeing it. Including the Northern Ocean, the Empire has about 3,200 kilometers of external frontier. Before this year, it had the same amount of internal frontier. This means that there are thousands of demi-human tribes bordering imperial lands, but they're not conducting some collaborative effort to pick on the Empire. They simply target the lands around them, human or otherwise, probing defenses and searching for the most efficient gains. I believe that most social races do this on some level, and independently strong creatures are similar in the sense that they also defend their hunting ranges. But every race has a different approach to growth. The tribes that my house has observed are fairly methodical. They grow, test borders, erode the power of the easiest tribe to deal with and push them out to take their land. Change tends to be slow because reckless warfare may reduce their numbers, allowing tribes the opportunity to capitalize upon their weakness. As far as I've heard from the Lords of the Wyvernmark, the behavior of the tribes here is nearly identical. So you're saying that demi-humans attacking us is normal, milady? It's natural, yes. Humans do the same thing, but the way human populations expand is rather one-sided. When a goblin tribe wins a war and expands, they don't transform the environment that they move into. When that tribe loses, they either move away or become slaves depending on whether migration is feasible. When they fight and their people die, it's just the way things are and life goes on. Humans, especially human-controlled territories, have this way of casting everything in shades of monolithic antagonism. If a small tribe attacks a village, they think that they're attacking another tribe. A human territory, however, will consider an attack against a single village an attack against the entire territory, and you end up with the Imperial Army paying that tribe a visit. That tribe had no idea that they were picking a fight with a country of 8 million. All that they saw was the farming village next door. This type of collective thinking that humans have has a way of spinning out of control. Everything that the group wants is good, everything that stops them from getting what they want is bad. Often, these groups are told what is good and what is bad by those in authority. Some might even go so far as to employ good and evil in their rhetoric. All opponents become the type of enemy that threatens their very survival, and a kill or be killed mentality is applied to entire populations and even entire races. But, as you can see from what is going on around us, it is not the only option. But you never know when they're gonna turn on us, Merge said from across the campfire. Lady Zaradnik set her empty bowl on the log beside her. She shifted slightly on her seat, folding her hands in her lap. Tribal populations, at least, are very clean in the way that authority works. The dynamics of tribal populations reflect the realities that they must consider. Conflict and displays of power make clear who holds the advantage in a way that conserves energy and results in the least damage. Every action must efficiently convey meaning, because unnecessary action can lead to unnecessary casualties and requires more food. In a tribe that subsists on their territory, this leads to a vicious cycle that invariably leads to death. It is inherently suicidal. Turning on the winner of a contest is also terminally stupid. A subjugated tribe might have lost, but they have also become part of a stronger population that can compete for more resources. If they are being added to the tribe rather than wiped out, their survival becomes contingent on their new tribe's survival for as long as that tribe can dominate their territory. You make it sound as if we can go and do the same thing. Before the Sorceress Kingdom annexed the Duchy of Erantal, the Baroness said, a farm girl on the northern frontier was able to establish her dominance over a tribe of ogres. They joined her village and even fought for the sake of their new tribe when danger came for them. They're still there, as far as I know. Joachim frowned. Her claim sounded like a whimsy spun by a bard. If demi-humans could be so easily tamed by farm girls, there would be no need for the Imperial Army. Maybe it was a farm girl in the realm of heroes, as silly as that sounded. I don't think our village girls can beat up ogres, milady. The Baroness smirked at Winston's words. Perhaps not, but violent subjugation is not the only answer. Having strong people around merely expedites the process. What is key is understanding the nature and motives of each race you encounter. Getting started is the hard part, because differences in culture can present challenges to effective communication. Coexistence is a continuous effort, as well. Just as humans might not always agree to get along, so too can it happen with other races. But, is it worth it? Paul asked. What makes a forest full of goblins better than a farm run by humans? As with anything else, Lady Zaradnik answered, potential must first be recognized before attempts at effectively harnessing it can be made. Even though I'd barely explored that potential with my own subjects, I've already come across some surprising things. Also, measures of worth should not be solely based on what you can immediately perceive. The more perspectives you have, the more opportunities you'll identify. Anyway, I should go visit Captain Ceres. He's probably 5 different types of confused right about now. Lady Zaradnik rose from her seat, going over to rinse out her bowl. She left it to dry on her desk before making her way towards the west side of the pass. The men of the 10th Company rose from where they were gathered around their fires and greeted her, their tones ranging from approval to adoration. I think half of them still think they watched an arena match, Joachim muttered. Maybe it's the same thing, Lady Zaradnik said. Or perhaps what they witnessed just now was the real thing. Not long ago, I was disdainful of the Empire's love for the grand arena, but I described the source of their apparent lust for bloodshed with an incomplete understanding of what I saw. I believe that I have a better idea of it now. What do you mean by that, my lady? Watching a match in the grand arena or a duel on an exercise field brings us back to the time when humans lived in tribes and the fortunes of all rested on the contests of our champions. It is an appreciation, a deep, primal respect, that flows in our blood regardless of lineage. To this day, it is an inviolable law of the world that we cannot escape no matter how we dress our reality. Something within every one of us simply knows that such an event demands our attention, even if conscious thought denies all else about it. They found Captain Ceres lying in his tent, one of his clerics attempting to force-feed him some sort of grey goo. The captain turned at their entrance, seemingly relieved for the excuse to send the man away. Baroness Zaradnik, he propped himself higher on his bed. It appears that the 10th Company owes you their lives. That damn mountain troll came straight for me. I don't recall ever meeting him before. He probably identified you as the leader. I hope you don't mind the avenue that I chose to follow. Captain Ceres snorted, shaking his head. I'm still not sure that I can believe what happened, but from what I hear you could have destroyed the entire tribe on your own. Why did you do what you did? They were being civil, so I decided to take them in. Civil? Yes, they were observing certain tribal customs. Ook went after you because you appeared to be the strongest. After you were incapacitated, they tried to induct you into their tribe instead of slaughtering everyone. Pretty nice of them, don't you think? Joachim exchanged a look with Captain Ceres. He had no idea that they were so close to being added to a demi-human tribe, nor did he want to think about what that would look like. Well, we're not in any position to complain, Captain Ceres said. General Ray aside, Commander Schuler asked us to confirm what happened 4 times before sending dragoons up to take a look around. I thought the Imperial Army had security protocols to authenticate their communications. I guess it just sounded that ludicrous. Is the 4th Division on their way up now? Yes, my lady, Captain Ceres nodded. Might I ask what you plan on doing with these demi-humans? The 4th Division's companies will begin arriving in the morning. They've submitted to my authority, so I suppose I have my own company here now. A demi-human company. It's not wrong, yes? Before our present-day government structures, human tribes had leaders and their warriors. Those leaders and their warriors become martial nobles and their regiments composed of men-at-arms. In the Empire, those regiments evolved to become the companies of the Imperial Army. My company just happens to be mostly composed of demi-humans. The captain shook his head again with an incredulous expression, scratching his unshaven cheek. Wait, Joachim frowned. Does that mean you're going to have us fight together with these demi-humans, my lady? A forebodingly winsome smile spread across Lady Zaradnik's face. It occurred to Joachim that he had never seen Lady Zaradnik wearing such a big, smiley smile. As she made her way out of the 10th Company's encampment, the men who encountered her smile couldn't help but be enchanted as she walked by with it. She certainly did smile, but, most of the time, it was a small, polite smile that wasn't really a smile. There was also the charming, lopsided one she used to indicate that she was being light-hearted. Joachim was certain that she employed it because she could often be mistaken for saying something uniquely horrifying if she didn't. Those smiles were not the big, happy, wholesome-looking smile like the one she had on right now. Usually, the Baroness frowned. Even her smiles could be frowns. She frowned more than Joachim's entire family combined, which made him wonder what the smiley smile meant. Lady Zaradnik smiled all the way to the other side of the pass, where she smiled her way through the demi-human dwellings along the shore, and members of her new company smiled in response to her smile. The smile led them to a rocky overhang where a half-dozen trolls were gnawing on bones stripped bare of any flesh. All healed up, Ook? The mountain troll answered her question with a sniff and a grunt. Was he being a sore loser? Of course you are, Lady Zaradnik said. Regeneration is quite convenient. Well, pick up your weapons and let's go. Go? Not far, just someplace where the trees won't get in the way of your practice. Practice? Joachim frowned. Do you truly mean to have them fight alongside us, my lady? Quoniam si qui non vult operari, nec manducit. Joachim blinked as he realized she had recited something in the language of the slain theocracy. I'm sorry, Lady Zaradnik said. I quoted something out of one of our scriptures. It means, I understood, my lady. Barely. It was one of the languages I was taught before I became an acolyte. I see. What other languages do you understand? Just 3. Or maybe closer to 2. Riastais and Baharuth have barely diverged in their language. The difference is a small selection of terms, at most. But would demi-humans understand something like that? The demi-humans are following right behind you, Priest Ward, Lady Zaradnik replied. Even if they aren't familiar with our concept of work, it is not a difficult one to grasp. Being simple is not necessarily synonymous with being stupid. Also, throwing demi-human over everything will get you in trouble one of these days. A troll here is not identical to a troll elsewhere, just as a human in the Theocracy is not identical to a human in Baharuth. As they walked away from the camp, Joachim tripped several times in the stifling darkness of the night. Lady Zaradnik stopped to hand him a magical light. He let out a shout and stumbled backwards as the item lit up the faces of the trolls looking down at him. "Over there looks good," the Baroness said. "Wait here, I'll be back in a bit." Lady Zaradnik effortlessly dashed off into the gloomy forest, definitively proving that she was, in fact, a ranger. Joachim glanced several times at the trolls, who went to lounge about with their backs to the nearby trees. After a few minutes, he gathered his courage and turned to address them. "I'm Joachim," he smiled nervously. "What are your names?" "Ook. OGH. Uo. Ga. Oo. Wo." How am I supposed to remember that? Never mind their names, he had no idea how to tell them apart. Aside from Ook, who was a different species of troll entirely, they may as well have been mossy boulders with arms and legs. Lady Zaradnik reappeared 30 minutes later with a large buck over her shoulders. She dressed her kill in front of them before pulling 5 more of them from her magical container and doing the same. Shortly after she tossed one to each of the trolls, several goblins appeared. The Baroness held out the deer hides to them. "Do you remember who Destin is?" she asked. One of the goblins nodded. "Bring these to him and he'll show you how to prepare them for curing." The goblins took the hides, holding them up between themselves as they scurried back towards the camp. "Eat up," she said. "We have a long night ahead of us." "We're staying out here all night, my lady? Do you have a ring of sustenance?" No. I'm not even sure what that is." "Then you're retiring for the night," Lady Zaradnik told him. "I need to understand how the members of Ook's tribe fight and what I can do to help them improve." Joachim wordlessly watched as the Baroness had Ook and the other trolls demonstrate how they wielded their weapons. There wasn't much to see, they swung as hard as they could, shouting as they did. Sometimes they accidentally, or purposely, hit one another, but he supposed that regeneration trivialized such injuries. There was no technique or finesse, only brute force. Lady Zaradnik, however, watched them intently. Maybe she saw things as a weapon master that regular people could not. His fatigue caught up with him after 30 minutes of watching. He excused himself before shuffling back to the campfire. A few of the men looked up as he entered the light. "Where's Lady Zaradnik?" Igval asked. "Back out there doing something with the trolls." "Like what?" "Training, I think." "Huh?" Being increasingly confused himself, Joachim didn't bother answering the infantryman. He crawled into his tent, no longer sure if he was a soldier of the Imperial Army or a member of some weird wilderness tribe. Early the next morning, he came out to see Redwin tending to the fire. "Good morning." "Mornin'." He looked around, stretching as he yawned. The squad's tents and stores were still in one piece and a few of the others were getting ready for the day. "So we survived the night?" "Yep. Didn't wake up with no goblin girl in my bedroll, either." Joachim sincerely hoped that there wasn't some story behind that statement. "Did the 4th Division come in?" "The first few companies started arriving about an hour ago," the fire cleric replied. "They're camping out near the 10th Company. I think they're raising a fort over there, too." That much was to be expected. They hadn't yet experienced any counterattacks, but they couldn't afford to lose the pass. Redwin handed him a bowl of soup and a roll of hard brown bread. "You sure Lady Zaradnik ain't actually a hobgoblin?" the other cleric asked. "Someone's going to lay you out if they hear that," Joachim replied. "Why do you ask?" "'Cause this tribe's starting to look like us Pukes back in training." He frowned and twisted around, trying to verify Redwin's claim through the trees. "It's only been one night," Joachim said. "It ain't pretty," Redwin said, "but neither were we." "Well, I guess we were prettier than that. Still weird as hell, though." Unable to contain his curiosity, Joachim finished off his meal before quickly getting dressed. He made his way over to the clearing where half of the squad was gathered, watching dozens of demi-humans gathered into loose ranks. The fact that they were ordered into ranks wasn't the only thing strange about them, but it took a moment for him to recognize what it was. "Did those ogres always have giant shields?" he asked. "No," Frank answered. "Lady Zaradnik had the 4th Division's engineers shape those big-ass shields for them. The sticks, too." Each ogre was holding a thick wooden tower shield 2 meters tall and a meter across. They also wielded a staff as tall as their shields. Aside from that, they had nothing but their crude tribal garb. Even so, the 2 pieces of equipment looked intimidating enough when wielded by the brutish-looking giantkin. The visible trolls sparred with staves, though theirs were as tall as they were and nearly as thick as Joachim's wrist. Without the shields of the ogres, they wielded their weapons as polearms. Rank after rank of goblins stood behind the ogres, each holding a crude bow. Shield wall. Rustles of ogre feet sounded over the forest floor as they locked their shields together and planted them on the ground. They went to one knee, lowering their heads completely behind the defensive wall. "Take your marks." The goblins behind the ogre shield wall looked forward, standing on their tiptoes or hopping up and down. Knock. Draw, loose. About half of the goblins loosed their bows in time. The others followed, sending dozens of arrows over the ogres. The projectiles didn't get far, landing between 40 to 60 meters away. "At least I ain't out of a job," Gaston said. Knock. Draw, loose. Another volley of arrows went over the shield wall. This time, it was slightly better coordinated. After several more volleys, Lady Zaradnik called for the goblins to retrieve their ammunition. The ogres set their shields on the forest floor and sat down. The Baroness came over to them with Ook following at her heels. "Good morning, gentlemen." "Good morning, milady," Frank said. "How'd you get them doing this so quick?" "I'm cheating at the moment," she replied. "After having them learn how to perform each step, I'm helping them to move at the right time with command skills. They're still a long way from being able to march in ranks or coordinate between themselves. I'd really like to recruit a hobgoblin one day and find out how they do it." "They do this sort of thing?" Paul asked. "Hobgoblins, I mean." "I'm pretty sure they're better than me at this," the Baroness said. "I had to fight against hobgoblins once. They had full, independently operating battalions that could march and fight in formation with captains and a general to command them. Heavy infantry 5 ranks deep, goblin archer corps and wolf riders, bugbear shock troopers and all sorts of magical support. They could use martial arts, too." Martial arts? All of them? But demi-humans with martial arts are supposed to be rare. Lady Zaradnik's dark-eyed gaze rested on the Cavalier for a moment, as if he had said something that she found strange. Joachim, however, did not believe Paul's statement to be incorrect. It was nearly unheard of for tribal demi-humans to employ martial arts or combat skills. All of the hobgoblins could. Many demi-humans in the Sorceress Kingdom can use martial arts, as well. The way that we were taking down trolls yesterday was something I learned from those hobgoblins back then, except that they were managing to do it against Death Knights. "Wait," Merge said, "didn't they think there were hobgoblins up here pulling the strings? We have to fight that?" "We encountered a hobgoblin leading a raiding party into the Empire," Lady Zaradnik said, "and there were reports of more raids after that. This cross-racial organization suggests that something like a hobgoblin is coordinating them. The Air Wing would have noticed a large army by now. Since they haven't, we shouldn't be running into anything too substantial. Also, unless they're being supplied with equipment by some unknown source, they should have the same sort of arms and armor as what you've seen out here so far." That much, at least, was a relief. Even with mundane equipment, however, Ook alone was an overwhelming threat against one of the 6th Legion's companies. "I guess being big and tough here will count for a lot, then," Frank said. "Even with these plain wood shields, these guys are going to be tough to get past." "That's the idea," the Baroness nodded. "The ogres will function as a mobile wall that hits people with sticks if they get too close, and the goblins will be able to use that wall for shelter. I had the trolls equipped with simple polearms that they already understand the basic use of, but I'll continue to train them in quarterstaff techniques as we go along. They'll be the hammer for this company, a regenerating hammer." "And since everything's made of wood," a voice came from behind them, "broken stuff is easy to replace." They turned to find Captain Ceres and a squad of men from his company behind him. All of them wore the incredulous expressions that Joachim and the others must have had when they first saw what was going on. Except for the arrows I requisitioned from the 4th Division, Lady Zaradnik replied. Good morning, Captain Ceres. Good morning, my lady. Commander Schuler arrived on Hippogriff just now. General Ray is on his way over, too. Thank you for letting me know, Captain. One moment while I speak to the Ook tribe. The Ook tribe. Lady Zaradnik smiled at the captain's reaction, turning away to address the demi-human tribe. The trolls and ogres were instructed to rest while a third of the goblins were sent out to hunt and forage. Joachim followed Lady Zaradnik and Captain Ceres over to the 4th Division's encampment, which had been raised behind a wall not dissimilar to the one General Ray had raised for the pass he had taken. General Ray's flight arrived just as they entered the central area of the camp and he joined them in Commander Schuler's pavilion. Several of the commander's captains were gathered around the simple table that had been put together out of sections of magically shaped pine. Good morning, General Ray, Commander Schuler said. The Baroness appears to have delivered as you've promised. She has, the general replied, a step on the way to a proper answer, I suppose. An answer, sir? The general nodded, offering a tight smile in response to Commander Schuler's befuddled expression. We've spoken at length about the 6th Legion, General Ray said. About its mandate and how the long-term goals of the Empire will be best served. While our task seems understandable enough, the standing doctrines we've carried with us from our domestic duties are ill-suited to carry it out. There are also nuances to operating out here that we need to understand as an expeditionary force. I see, Commander Schuler replied. Well, I would be a fool to disagree. The Imperial Army hasn't seen an operation like this since, well, never. If we are to provide you with an answer, my lady, what is the question? There is more than one question, Lady Zaradnik told him, but they are the same questions that the Sorceress Kingdom has asked the Empire since it formalized its status as a client state. The Empire lacked the ears to hear those questions in past months, providing answers it was unaware that it was providing. I have come across several outstanding individuals who have recognized the questions for what they are, but it is in this expeditionary army that the Empire can ill afford to produce answers blindly. The commander's eyes went to the table, where a map of the region lay as it tended to in the officers' pavilions of the Imperial Army. I'm a military man, my lady, he said. Of these questions that I believe that your royal court is asking, I am only qualified to offer input on those related to our military operations. It's not the place of the military to dictate national policy. It isn't, Lady Zaradnik agreed, but, at the same time, the Court Council has charged you with leading the Empire into unfamiliar territory both literally and figuratively. The steps that you take in pursuit of your charge will form the foundations of Imperial foreign policy in regard to its expansionary efforts. As such, you would be doing a disservice to the Empire if you do not explore all potential avenues. And this is what you're doing now with this demi-human tribe? Showing us a potential avenue? I am bringing many potential avenues to your awareness, the Baroness told him. As a liaison officer, my duty is to help develop mutual understanding. There are many aspects of the Sorceress Kingdom that the Baharuth Empire appears to be blind to. The root of this blindness is part ignorance and part cultural conditioning. While I'm sure that my government will be able to work with any answer you provide, I believe you would at least like to make an informed answer. Baroness Zaradnik made a broad gesture to the map lying between them. The Baharuth Empire is on the precipice of drastic change due to the advent of the Sorceress Kingdom. On the security front, the adoption of Death Series servitors will effectively make your lands impervious to all but the most powerful hostile incursions that the region can bring to bear. With the supplements to your security comes the solidification of the Empire's existing stability. A period of unprecedented growth and development lies before you. Your former military venture, the gradual annexation of Riestais, is no longer a valid avenue for expansion. As an ascendant power, you will of course seek other avenues. This leads us to the formation of the 6th Legion as the expeditionary arm of the Imperial Army. Your ventures are not the occasional operation by a local division to carve out a bit of frontier for development, but the systemic conquest of vast swathes of territory that will inevitably draw the eye of all concerned parties in the region. The young noblewoman looked up from the map, her gaze drifting over every man at the table. By your actions, you not only answer the questions posed to you by your suzerain but those posed by all who are aware of you. The Baharuth Empire is not a singular existence that stands above the rest of the world. You are a part of the world. I would urge you to consider those actions and their results carefully lest you inadvertently paint yourselves in an unflattering color.